Good afternoon, everyone. Before we launch in today, I'm going to make a comment about our colleague who, as all can see, will be participating electronically. Board member Karen Tonis is participating in today's work session electronically in accordance with state law, as well as the board's policy. He is joining us from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, where he is attending the Congress for New Urbanism. And we look forward to hearing about it when you get back. Mr. Karen Tonis, thank you. Looks like we've got a great connection there. Okay, welcome to our 7th work session of the fiscal 2023 budget cycle. Today we are focused on all things capital, pay as you go, transportation capital fund, the Crystal City tax increment financing revenue source, the TIF, debt service, as well as metro funding. We do not have any commission representatives joining us today, but we do have quite a few presentations divided, broadly speaking, across 5 different categories. I am going to manage us towards about half an hour on each one. I do not have a timer to set for each speaker, but would ask for your partnership in ensuring that each category can be covered within that half hour, as well as possible, leaving time for some board member questions. I will be sure to speak up when we are in danger of exceeding that half-hour time limit. Without further ado, we will launch in with DMF, and I believe that we are welcoming Ms. Talley, our capital budget coordinator, to begin with the first presentation. Is that right? Excellent. We are so glad to have you this afternoon. I will turn the mic over to you.
I believe this is on. Got it. So good afternoon, Chair Crystal and members of the board. My name is Karen Talley, and I'll be presenting to you the summary of the capital program budget for FY23. I'll be followed by each of the departments that will present their programs for FY23. This is the agenda that we'll be walking through on today. Next slide, please. So the FY23 capital program budget covers a large portfolio of infrastructure investments. From our roads to our parks, technology and government facilities, the FY23 capital spending totals over $160 million. These investments are funded from a variety of revenue sources. Most of these sources are restricted in nature. Federal, state, funding from bond issuances, and net tax support all support these multi-year investments. As we present the capital program to you today, we'll highlight the various sources of funding and outline why these projects are important to this year's capital program. Many of the projects will be presented have already been approved through the adopted FY22 through 24 CIP last summer, and a number of projects span multiple years where initial funding began in this fiscal year and continue into FY 2023. This spring, we'll return to our 10-year CIP planning process. This proposed FY23 capital budget builds the foundation for that plan by continuing to focus investments on our long-stated goal of maintaining what we have. The budget is a snapshot of an ongoing capital program that has previous capital projects that are already underway, along with the proposed projects that will be presented to you today. Examples of some of the projects underway include the construction of Fire Station 8, the Lacey Woods Park improvements, the West Glebe Road Bridge renovation, as well as the Treasurer's Enterprise Payment Portal upgrade. Throughout this presentation, we'll be presenting a comprehensive look at all capital funding sources. But because this is the annual operating budget, we'll focus on pay-as-you-go and short-term finance projects. This slide illustrates the various funding sources that feed into the capital program. Capital funding has certain sources that are dedicated and restricted to specific capital activities. I'll begin with Paygo Funding. Our pay-as-you-go capital program is funded with a mix of both ongoing and one-time funding. It's important to have that mix because it allows us the necessary flexibility to maintain what we have, as well as address unanticipated projects that are identified outside of the larger CIP planning process. This year's Paygo budget is funded at $23.7 million and is funded from a transfer of general fund dollars, reallocated fund balance, as well as legally restricted bond premium funds. Other sources under the dedicated and restricted category are the transportation and metro funds. The Crystal City TIF, Transportation Capital Fund, and our state, federal, and regional grant funds are all restricted in use and dedicated for transportation and other metro activities. These three sources together represent 59% of the overall capital funding portfolio. The final two funding sources are short-term finance and general obligation bonds. Short-term finance is 11% of the overall capital program and typically funds our core technology assets. GO bonds in this budget represent previously approved bonds. The larger GO bond discussion about new bonds will be in the upcoming CIP process. As mentioned from the previous slide, Paygo is proposed to be funded at $23.7 million from a variety of funding sources, including a mix of ongoing and one-time dollars. It funds the replacement of assets with a useful life of 10 years or less, mostly projects that are not appropriate for long-term financing. Paygo has traditionally been used to fund the routine maintenance of our capital assets. It serves to reduce the failure of our infrastructure by investing with the goal of maintaining our large portfolio of assets in a state of good repair. As in the most recent previous years, Paygo dollar investments have continued to be concentrated on must-have projects and assets at the end of their life cycle. In addition, we focused on funding extending the useful life of assets while also replacing assets that have a possible risk of near-term failure. As we're beginning to see some semblance of our new normal, we're continuing to adjust our budget to reflect the evolving priorities of our board and community with investments to support a variety of technology and energy infrastructure needs. In keeping with our sound financial policies, it's important to maintain Paygo as a flexible cash source. The bond rating agencies positively view having a mix of cash and finance dollars. This slide illustrates the various funding sources for Paygo across the past 5 years. As you can see, ongoing funding across the last 2 years has been decreased as a result of the financial impact of the pandemic. If you notice, between fiscal years 20 and 21, the ongoing Paygo budget was reduced by $5 million. With the projected impacts of the economic shutdown, ongoing Paygo dollars were reduced to help balance the operating budget. Increased Paygo dollars are required to provide programs a stable funding source. This will allow departments to develop a sustainable and predictable maintenance capital investment program. General obligation bonds are long-term debt financing for both county and school capital infrastructure projects. They fund county projects such as the Bluemont Park Tennis Complex replacement, facility programs and improvements at the 2020 14th Street building, capital maintenance projects, and the repaving of our roads. Every 2 years, as part of the CIP process, the board approves a referenda that includes 2 years of GO bond funding. That referenda must then be approved by voters in November. The $24.8 million included here includes funds from the previous referenda that had balances to be spent. As I talked about earlier, the capital program implements projects across several years, and this demonstrates a good example of that with the issuance of GO bond funds across several years as the project is being executed. Bond dollars are used to finance projects with an average useful life of 10 years or more and adhere to approved financial policies. Short-term debt financing is the financing of assets with a useful life of 3 to 10 years. Because of the shorter useful life of the projects, the interest rates are typically lower than rates for long-term bonds. So, similar to a car loan, its finance tool allows us to spread payments over a term rather than paying all at once. This, of course, helps with the affordability of all of the equipment that is purchased with this source. As with GO bonds, debt service for short-term financing is funded in the general fund and the operating budget. This source has historically been used to finance equipment for enterprise technology and public safety. However, other types of assets like fitness equipment and synthetic turf fields with useful lives of greater than 3 years are also financed through short-term financing. As stated earlier, while we're beginning to experience parts of our new normal, there are some lasting economic impacts from the pandemic that we're having to work through as part of our capital budgeting process. You will see many, if not all of these concerns as part of the upcoming CIP process. Construction costs are continuing to increase. Pandemic-induced supply chain issues are a main driver, along with increased demand for materials and labor shortages. The increased costs of bulk materials and large equipment are also major contributors to capital project price increases, as well as an increase in execution times for projects. And finally, the lead time necessary to receive materials for any given project is another added factor in cost growth. The capital program is continuing to work to overlay a racial equity lens in the development of the program. Each of the department presentations that follow will present how they are working to implement a racial equity review of projects to ensure that our communities have an equitable access and resources that will lead to a more thriving community. In closing, I'd like to mention that while we have presentations from most of our major programs, there are smaller programs that have dollars invested for the FY23 capital budget. And with that, I am available for questions, or you can ask questions at the end after all the other departments present.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. Colleagues, do we have any questions about the general sort of principles that have been presented on in the larger picture, knowing then that we'll go into the specifics of different departmental spends? Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, just one quick overall question, because you talked about the inflationary pressures and everything. So I assume this budget is planning for that we're going to be hit with higher, so Paygo is going to cost more moving forward. And that, I assume that's been planned for here, just confirming.
The dollars that are included, so what we've afforded in this FY23 budget includes whatever inflationary costs are there. So there aren't any additional dollars that we're planning for FY23, but what we have afforded includes the increased costs.
Okay, so for inflation, and then, but I suppose we may still get caught up short depending on what happens with construction
There is a
costs and things like that.
possibility.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, terrific. Mr. Karantonis, any general questions before we move on to the specific capital programs?
No, Madam Chair, we can proceed.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, in that event, Ms. Talley, thank you so much for that general orientation to our capital program and how it's been shifting. And with that, I think we'll move straight into the Department of Environmental Services, one of our biggest customers of the capital program, so to speak. I believe that first we're going to hear from Mr. May, who's the Deputy Director for Facilities and Engineering, about the General Facilities and Energy Management Program. Is that right, Mr. May? Are you with us on the phone?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I am, and you've nailed it. I'll get it started, and we'll hear from both facilities design and construction and facilities management.
Great.
So going forward, today our team will cover both what we've completed and have ongoing work that's funded from our previous authorizations. We'll discuss in both FD&C and facilities management specific work we plan to complete with this request. And in my wrap-up, I'll address some of the considerations that you heard Karen mention, as well as how we influenced our priorities for this request, and also how our programs will be supporting the community energy program. In terms of our support to the DES vision and mission, our goal and our support is managing our 92 buildings to both maintain a state of good repair and to respond to emerging community and user group needs. And I'll speak to that particular issue in a moment. The next slide shows some of our recent achievements. We've replaced major mechanical equipment that was nearing end of life in three major facilities in the top right of that picture set. We've done multiple interior upgrades that improve spaces for both our county users and our staff. And in the forward planning area, we identified options for the eventual replacement of Fire Station 4 as an element of the pending revision to the Clarendon Sector Plan. Next are examples of current work that's underway with our appropriate authorizations. Continuation of operating equipment replacement. The upper left picture is at the Trade Center Network Operating Center. We recently completed replacement of the uninterrupted power supply, and we'll be replacing the power distribution units later this year. All of this work has been planned so that we had no outage while we were doing the work. We're continuing to install fire station bifold doors that improve our operational safety. We have continuing and ever continuing interior renovations across multiple facilities, some of the pictures you see here. And in terms of our forward planning, we developed a concept for relocation of AED programs to the 3700 4-mile run building. Our equity approach contains 3 key elements. We're creating accessible facilities for all. We're maintaining a state of good repair for safe usage of our facilities. And we're responding to user and facility needs across all areas for an equitable distribution of funding. Next. Our assets and our challenge is maintaining our 92 county-owned buildings, some 2.5 million square feet, and serving 9 operating departments with facility staff to support 24/7 operations in 33 of the buildings. In the bottom row, you see we have 5 vacant facilities, 2 of which will be repurposed in the near term. At the Quincy site, Building 2 will be prepared for the ART bus dispatch and driver waiting areas starting this spring. And we'll also be starting design for relocation of fire staff from the Hudson Street building that's adjacent to Fire Station 4 to one of the 4 vacant floors in the 2020 14th Street building, as Karen mentioned. The former hospital building at our Collins Springs site still contains about 60% of our
Mr. May, I think we lost you there on a cliffhanger. The Collins Springs site still contains about 60% of what?
60% of, I'm sorry, it went blank for a moment. 60%, it's about 60% of that 275,000 square feet of space.
Great, thank you.
And we want to consider funding for its removal in the next CIP process. At this point, I will introduce Michelle Condon for Facilities Design and Construction, followed by Rami Natur for Facilities Management, who will present our individual area Paygo requests.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Condon for Facilities Design and Construction. With a combination of Paygo, GO Bond, and bond premium funding this year, our top priority requests include continued funding to study evolving facility scenarios of yet-to-be-funded projects, and we focus on our 24/7, fully occupied, and public service buildings for interior upgrades. Next slide. This past year, we studied various test fits that will inform our pending CIP requests. With this year's Paygo request, we will study buildings at the Trade Center Optimization Plan for potential uses of vacated space, bus electrification, and structured bus parking. Remaining projects would include unknown feasibility and schematic studies as they arise. Last fiscal year, the design of the staff restrooms in the detention facility was completed and permitted. This request is for the construction funding to implement those. Next is the 3rd phase of the Central Library refresh that began in 2018. The project includes upgrading the staff pantry, 2nd-level new offices, common area furniture and AV replacement, and targeted flooring, painting, and lighting upgrades. This next grouping of projects includes the systematic reinvestment in the interior spaces within our owned and leased spaces. These projects create a safer environment, benefit to the public, and increase staff morale. Our immediate focus areas for this work include 24/7 operations and buildings that are fully occupied and continue to provide daily service for our public. County workspaces are changing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and facilities that have been and continue to be operated at full staffing levels continue to be our top priority. These projects consist of systems furniture replacement for our oldest inventory with electrical failures, along with interior maintenance that continues to address the disparities in older versus newer buildings in the county's inventory. I will now turn the presentation over to Rami Natour.
Thanks, Michelle. Good afternoon. I'm Rami Natour for Facility Management Bureau. FMB continues to use Facility Condition Assessments, FCA, as a foundation for effective decision-making by measuring the building's conditions. We use FCAs as an objective benchmark that, when combined with our on-the-ground awareness of equipment requiring excessive repetitive corrective maintenance, provides the basis for our Paygo and CIP requests. Several facilities throughout the county are essential to the operation of public safety and first responses. The CSI program operates out of the Facility Management Bureau. It encompasses the management of day-to-day operations, on-call as needed after-hours work, and long-term capital improvement projects. FMB is working on installation EV throughout the county facilities. This effort will closely track the Equipment Bureau EV purchasing plan. In addition, the infrastructure for the public use, this project is to fund the costs associated with fast charging hub installations on government sites. Key sites under considerations are the Bosman Government Center and the Central Library parking lots. With a combination of Paygo, bond, and bond premium funding this year, our top priorities requests include, next please. Arlington County Police electrical equipment and panel recommissioning to prevent power surges that are causing damages to the HVAC equipment. Residential Program Center, RPC, fire alarm replacement. The existing fire alarm system is obsolete and is no longer supported by the manufacturer. Sullivan House refresh, upgrade fire system to meet ADA requirements, repair cracks on the exterior facade, replace existing window type HVAC units and sagging floor, and refresh the kitchen and bathrooms. Fire Station 5 roof replacement. The existing green roof is 15 years old and has with more frequent leaks and repairs. The new green roof will have a higher R value, and this will provide better energy efficiency to the building and reduce future utility expenses. CSI project Fire Station IT Closet. To enhance the security in our IT closet at the fire stations, we will add additional cameras, card readers, and cooling. In addition, this will improve the standardize the security of our IT closets at fire stations. CSI project, which is Courseware West, backup 911 call center, and the trades HVAC replacement. Existing units are failing and are causing the facility to overheat. I'll now turn the presentation over to George May.
Thank you, Rami. The next slide, please. All right, as I mentioned, we were going to cover, I want to cover some of the considerations that drive our Paygo priorities. And as Rami just mentioned, maintaining the state of good repair is a key. And we use both facility condition assessments combined with our maintenance workload to set our replacement targets. As we discussed earlier, we also are responding to additional operational needs. COVID vaccine set up in 3 community centers as an example. And maintenance of the end-of-life facilities is limited to maintaining critical operations. We mentioned an eventual transition of staff from the Hudson Street Fire Prevention Office to the 2020 building. It is an end-of-life facilities, but we will focus on keeping it in service for the remaining 2 years it takes to complete that transition. As you heard from Karen, adjusting to market realities is an issue for us. And in our case, for instance, the facility condition assessment database, which lists equipment replacement costs, the publisher is increasing those this year by 6.25%. Closer to home, our on-the-ground experience with cost rises in major equipment such as chillers and cooling towers. On the aggregate, those prices increased 19% in the last 9 months, and delivery increased from 3 to 4 months to the current 7 to 8 months. And finally, a gallon of our contracted commercial grade paint has doubled from the pre-COVID price of $30 a gallon to $60. And move to the next slide, where we'll discuss further how we are supporting the community energy plan goals. We are, as you heard from Rami, ramping up our EV charging stations in county parking areas to match the growth in the county fleet's EV goals. Additionally, we're installing EV charging at the trade center for the APS electric bus pilot program. We're moving forward with additional EV charging in the public lots. Currently, there are charging stations at the Longbridge Aquatic Fitness facility, and we will be adding, as you heard, Central Library and Courthouse. We have an aggressive program to continue installation of solar panels where the opportunity presents itself. This listing are all of the facilities that we are looking to provide panels in the next year or so. In terms of energy efficiency, as a part of the community energy program, we're looking at electrification of major equipment. We're undertaking a pilot program this year to replace the hot water system, which is a hot water system for both domestic and heating, at the 3,700 4-mile run building with an electric boiler. We're going to learn the extent of equipment availability, the impact on the building power feed and its transformer and switchgear, and its effectiveness in heating. This learning experience will enable us to set guidelines for future replacements, which have been identified by the AIR program with their targeted additional replacements of major mechanical heating equipment that should be considered for electrification. And that will be part of our ongoing progress. Additionally, we can point out the construction of the new group home at 1212 South Irving is projected to proceed to achieve a net zero energy consumption. We'll have a geothermal field, we'll have solar panels, and if all goes as planned, that will be a net zero facility. Next, please. We are funding constrained, as we heard Karen describe in her introduction to these discussions, and we will have deferrals. And as we prolong deferrals and with constrained funding and uncertainties, we will be looking at additional cost growth in the out years. Some of the deferred priorities in 23 are listed here. We propose to do a comprehensive study on the detention center, matching that we did in the courts police several years ago, to determine how their operational needs have changed and would impact the layouts. Trade center muster rooms for staff reporting every day for a refresh is one of our deferred priorities, as well as the items that increase our deferred maintenance backlog. The buildings at the Quincy site largely need new HVAC units, and the Justice Center, the elevators and escalators, major maintenance has been deferred for another year. So these aging inventories create challenges and for our maintenance of end of life. And finally, with our current funding constraints, our long-term facilities planning and community engagement efforts are likely going to be deferred until fiscal 24. So that concludes the facilities section. We're pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Mr. May. We appreciate that presentation. I'm going to open the floor for questions on any of the general approaches to facilities and engineering, which covers indeed a pretty wide swath across the county. I'll look to colleagues for any questions. Again, I'll just share my enthusiasm for what we can learn from replacing that hot water system at 4700 with electric boilers. I know there's been interest in doing so, and I'm glad we're taking a stab at that and hopefully learning for other projects by starting with one of our relatively smaller community facilities. Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just appreciate the pieces on electric vehicles, and I guess I might follow up with a question in writing and seeing if the planning and work that you have done, I guess if you had an initial sense, does the planning and work that you've done, could it be scalable to do more if we had additional available resources, or have you planned for the investments that are outlined in the presentation, and that would require new planning? I don't know whether that's a question for Mr. May or and I can also submit in writing if need be.
Okay, well, the plan that we have embedded in our budget, in our work plan, is aligned to what we understand from the Equipment Bureau on their purchases of additional electric vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
So we are working closely with them. So we're ramping up our EV charging to match the acquisition of vehicles. And we are distributing it to the various facilities, for instance, at Sequoia, where DHS uses electric vehicles, in courthouse area where a number of our staff have dedicated or assigned vehicles for their daily operations that park in either any of the garages in the courthouse area.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thanks, Mr. May.
Thank you. Any other questions from colleagues? Yeah, Mr. Karantonis.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I align with you to thank Mr. May and the entire team for actually trying out and trying to study electric water heating at 3700 South 4 Mile Run. Mr. May, if I remember correctly, this is a building with a flat roof that gets a lot of sun. And just as a note, I'm not an engineer. I don't really know too much about that, but this would be for me always a place where also solar water heating would be, or a combination of electric and solar water heating would be, viable. But this is really not a question. It's just a note on that. On the EV chargers for our county fleet, is it the plan to do the installations or provide a system that similar to the question of Mr. DeFerranti, that would be also available for the public, or scalable or expandable in a way that would serve the public as well?
Well, up to now, sir, we have distinguished between the charging stations for county vehicles, which are activated with something very similar to the fuel card the current vehicle uses when it want to refuel. We haven't studied on the adaptability of the county dedicated spaces because presumably they're focused on county vehicles. We do have a parallel program, and I see Demetra has raised her hand and can comment further about our approach to putting additional EV charging for the public in our county-owned surface spaces, garage, parking lots. So, Demetra?
Yes. Good afternoon, Board, and thank you, George, for the opportunity to add on to the great work that Facilities is doing. And as you know, a member of Facilities is working with us and a cross-departmental internal stakeholder team on the DECTRANS plan, the Decarbonization of Transportation plan. Ironically, we had a status meeting this morning, and the subject of that meeting was really to fine-tune Task 5, which is going to be the EVSE, the Charging Network Siting Plan, an assessment plan. So that will be coming, the current schedule for completion of that task is November of this year. It's going to look at both county government vehicles It's also going to include, there's a separate task for APS vehicles, including buses, of course. But it's also going to be the public facing plan. So there's going to be a heat map, there's going to be a projection of high demand. So you will be seeing something that is more integrated and comprehensive for both the government and the community facing planning later on this year.
Thank you. Mr. May, just a very short question. Again, it helps me to understand the inflationary pressure along the lines of what Ms. Garvey has asked before. So yes, we see several materials, etc., being more expensive in the market right now, or their price going up. Is that a function of just the pricing of these materials, or is there also an issue of how they are available through the supply chain? So sometimes they are not available on time. Sometimes, for example, I have seen some examples where if you wait a little bit more, you may still get the materials that you need at a reasonable price and not at the highest possible price. So is that a combination of these two things, or is it an absolute standard that now prices are significantly higher? You mentioned 6.25% or more.
Well, Mr. Carantonis, it is a moving target. And so we have observed, for instance, the cost of overhead doors went up appreciably, and then it came down a bit. So there is a question of timing. But when we are looking at a year in advance to establish a budget for the construction programs we want to undertake, we use our best judgment and a projection of some anticipated inflation. I think I might add, when we begin to look at the out years, as we may in our next CIP cycle, that will be an additional challenge.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, well, thank you so much to our Facilities Bureau team for the overarching presentation and for the good discussion about sustainability priorities in particular. Although our transportation team is part of DES, I think we are going to hear from them later in the afternoon, if that's right, under the Transportation Capital Fund. So somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but for now I believe we are going to move on to the Department of Parks and Recreation, represented by Mr. Beach, our Planning Division Chief, if that's right. Mr. Beach, nice to see you. Over to you.
Thank you. Nice to see you as well, Madam Chair and County Board members. Good afternoon. I am the Park Division Chief, so you were correct with that for the Department of Parks and Recreation. Before I get started, just take a quick moment to thank a couple key staff members who helped develop this proposal that you will see. Our Director, Jane Rudolph, Assistant to the Director, Becky Schmidt, our Capital Asset Manager, Bob Capper, and our Budget Specialist, Brittany Canny, all of who were critical in helping develop this year's requests. So at the very top, our request starts through DPR's vision, which is for Arlington to be the happiest, healthiest place to live, learn, work, and play, and is informed by our mission to promote wellness and vitality through dynamic programs and attractive public spaces. Our capital program directly ties into this vision and mission by supporting several DPR strategic goals, which are providing excellent places and spaces to meet community needs, creating and maintaining the parks and facilities that provide excellent programs and services to meet those needs, and is managing the county's assets efficiently and effectively. So that will sort of be a tie-in you'll see throughout our proposal this year. Next slide, please. I'd like to take a moment to highlight a few of our major accomplishments for 2021. These projects were able to navigate challenges associated with COVID during both their design and their construction phases. After delays in equipment manufacturing and delivery, which extended the project for some time, Zacala Park opened in 2021 to an eager and happy neighborhood. It included a renovated playground, shade structure, basketball court, game tables, ADA compliant circulation, landscaping, and stormwater improvements. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. On the left hand of the slide, this one, you will see the Longbridge Aquatics and Fitness Center and the park, which has ribbon cutting last September. It has had a successful 8 months of initial operation. We're now very much looking forward to the first full summer of users enjoying the outdoor aspects of the park as well. On the right, you will see an image of the playground at Roswell Highlands Park. Both the playground, which is located adjacent to Queens Court development, and the new Roswell Highlands Park, which was completed through a partnership with the Penzance development, have both recently opened. This park is located over multiple parcels and integrated with the Heights School. We think it's a great example of innovative design to meet the needs of residents in Arlington's dense Roswell corridor. Thank you. Next slide. As part of our ongoing synthetic field program that would now manages 17 synthetic fields, DPR completed the replacement of the turf at Virginia Highlands Park in August of 2021. Next. DPR has been making progress in our trail and bridge program as well. On the left, you will see a photo of the recently completed stretch of the Bluemont Junction Trail. And we'll be making some completion of its connector trails throughout 2022. In 2021, DPR also renovated the Lucky Run Trail and portions of Arlington Boulevard and 4 Mile Run trails. On the right in this slide, you will see a photo of the recently installed and long-awaited Glen Carlin pedestrian bridge. Additionally, we have completed our public process with the Love Run pedestrian bridge, and I look forward to its installation later this year. As is typical, DPR has between 25 and 30 capital projects that are in various stages of renovation each year. In this chart, you'll see what we're currently undertaking, but some highlights include the scoping of projects for several replacement pedestrian bridges in Bluemont and Alcova Heights Park. Our team is working on our initial organization of large master plans, such as Arlington Boathouse and Penn Place public space areas. We have multiple projects in the design phase, such as the renovation of the tennis complex at Bluemont Park, playgrounds at Gunston, Monroe, and Lacey Woods parks, new parks that are in development like the former Teardrop parcel and temporary parks in Crystal City. And we have several synthetic turf replacements underway. And currently in construction, we are replacing the old Gunston bubble with a ribbon fabric structure. We're renovating a playground at Marcy Road Park. We're bringing restrooms into ADA compliance and looking forward to the very near completion of Jenny Dean Park and John Robinson Jr. Town Square. Each year, we look at the way equity intersects with our capital program. Traditionally, we attempt to ensure equitable distribution of our projects, and on the map on the right shows how that will look via this year's program. As I talked about in the past, DPR is currently nearing completion of the inventory of all our assets and assessment of those assets' condition and safety. As we finish that work in its organization, we will next be tackling how that informs our capital program. One of the things we are focusing on is can and how a set of equity indicators may factor into any formulas associated with prioritization of the capital program or other means in determining prioritization. During our long-range and master planning work, DPR is always and will continue to factor equity into our planning work and our engagement work by focusing on key questions such as who is impacted, how are they impacted, amongst a variety of other questions. And lastly, in developing our capital program, we strive to coordinate this program with the 2019 Public Spaces Master Plan and what it identified as areas of need as it relates to access and levels of service recommended in that document. As mentioned by Jane Rudolph in her presentation last week on the operating budget, DPR manages a broad range of assets across 147 parks. Assets that need to be maintained or replaced include 81 playgrounds, 180 different types of courts, 17 synthetic fields, 9 dog parks, 25 restrooms, 40 miles of trails, 67 bridges and low water fords, and a slew of convenience amenities such as tables, benches, grills, and drinking fountains. Next slide, please. There are a variety of ways in which we manage our inventory to inform our capital program. With all the assets shown in the previous slide, DPR has been making steady progress and working with our third-party consultant to identify, inventory, and record the locations of those assets. At the same time, a third-party consultant with staff has been assessing those assets to their condition and safety issues. We are bringing that phase of our project to a close, and after organizing that data, we'll focus on how that information informs our capital maintenance program. With our synthetic fields, we test and review our impact ratings and inspect the carpet for any issues like rips and tears. For our trails, we assess their condition by using the Paving Condition Index. The last time that was completed was in 2018. We are getting ready to undertake that work again. And then this time, we anticipate being able to assess an even greater amount of number of trails and distance of trails as new technology may allow us to go places the previous assessments were not without damaging trees and other important natural resources. Similarly, we are refreshing our bridge assessment as we have recently identified through research and discussions with entities such as Nova Parks that the county has ownership of several additional bridges, and it includes the new bridges that were part of the recently signed agreement between VDOT and the Arlington County Board in regard to Gateway Park. When DPR assembles its capital program, there are several key considerations that we take into account. The first is our ability to maintain a level of funding that achieves a state of good repair across our assets. The second is that we have a need to meet already underway efforts, such as certain timeline commitments to in-process planning efforts or external stakeholders such as development community. Third consideration is where we can best bring our funds to bear, that we can maximize external funding of outside agencies such as APS, affiliate groups, or the Neighborhood Conservation Program. This slide provides a brief overall summary of this year's request. In FY22, DPR received $4.8 million in Paygo funding and $368,000 in short-term financing. This year, in FY23, DPR is requesting $1.2 million in Paygo funding and $1.3 million in short-term financing. For additional information, DPR has $5 million in previously authorized bonds that will be sold later to fund the construction of the Bluemont tennis court renovation as part of that project. And in the CIP booklet, DPR will be showing almost $500,000 in partnerships, which is provided by APS through our cost-sharing arrangement with APS to replace synthetic turf fields. I'll now go briefly through the projects that will be funded as part of the FY23 request. This request includes $165,000 for our capital asset manager, who manages our asset study and does a major share of the work along with our budget specialist in organizing our CIP program. Our program shows $225,000 for the Parks Field Fund. As you might recall, this is the money that is brought into the county through the fees assessed to our affiliate sports user groups who use our various fields. The feasibility study implementation program allows DPR to react in real time to the need for planning initiatives and studies that arise outside of the planned projects and typically come about through private development and APS proposals. This program also allows for small scale implementation of those studies if it's necessary. The first new project in DPR's request is for just under $400,000 to begin design work on replacing the playground, ADA improvements, site furnishing, landscaping, and stormwater management at Bailey's Branch Park. The older playground here is impacted by its age and that the play equipment manufacturer is no longer in existence and replacement parts are unavailable and maintenance repairs are becoming increasingly more challenging to that issue. One important note is that this renovation project is a neighborhood priority and it is expected that future construction requests will be split with Neighborhood Conservation Program in an effort to maximize the use of DPR and NC programs funds and should be a great partnership. Second project in our FY23 request is $240,000 to begin design for the replacement of the Woodmont playground. This older playground has the same equipment from the manufacturer as Bailey's Branch, and the parts are no longer available. And as you can see in this photo, this shows a piece of play equipment that has been removed due to safety reasons that cannot be replaced. The project will replace the playground, site furnishings, landscaping, stormwater management, address ADA circulation, and repave the parking lot. Included in this year's request is $100,000 for the proactive replacement of aging or broken equipment at DPR facilities such as treadmills, stationary bikes, and other equipment. $715,000 to replace the Greenbrier running track for community and APS use. The track was last replaced in 2007 and is showing its age. It has thinning areas and pockmarked surface. It just might be noted that the county covers this replacement and does not share in project costs with APS. The last project to note is the construction to fund the underway design process for the replacement of the Bluemont tennis courts. This funding was previously authorized, but the bonds have not yet been issued and will allow us to complete the design work we're currently doing with the community. Our last capital program to review is the synthetic field program, which this year includes $982,000 to replace the field at Wakefield High School. This is a cost that will be split 50-50 with APS according to our cost sharing agreements. And this actually concludes my presentation. I can answer any questions. I'm happy to do so that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beach, for that whirlwind tour. I appreciate it very much. That's just capturing that slide about the asset inventory of Parks and Recreation. It's pretty stunning. I'll look to my colleagues for any questions that they may have about some of the items or priorities that you've presented today or anything else not shared. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Beach, as it relates to the redesign of playgrounds, play spaces such as Woodmont and Bailey's Branch, is there a framework that you apply to increase accessibility for people who are differently abled as far as mobility to access and participate in the redesign?
Yes, actually that is a continuously evolving field. And so our design team endeavors to keep as current as possible to different ways that we may provide access to people of all ages, abilities, and the needs they may have out there. Over the years, things have evolved from having certain services to, more of the pour in place services you see, or ways that equipment can be accessed. So that way you may not need a caregiver or somebody to help you do that. And so I'm not sure if there's anything specific that you had in mind, but we do is one of the very first and priority things that we are looking at when we're designing our facilities. One is access. When I talk about AD circulation, how to get there. And then once you're there, what can you do? What kind of experiences you can have, whether it's tactile, ambulatory, visual, all of these different things, and how that can be a benefit to a whole range of folks.
Yeah, that's helpful. Mostly, I wasn't looking for anything specific, just knowing that there was some sort of professional methodology employed as opposed to just responding to feedback that you may get from whoever participates in the process and designing according to that. Thank you.
Excellent. And Mr. Cardenas, I see you've appeared there. Did you have a question as well?
Yes, very short, very short, Madam Chair. Thank you. Mr. Beach, thank you for the presentation. I'm actually very encouraged to see that you're working on a new asset assessment tool or asset inventory tool. I guess this is really necessary given the the variety and just sheer mass of assets that you're managing. I'm just conveying two constituent requests for thinking. One is, and I'm sure that you know about them, sun shading for playgrounds as an additional feature where this is not available, especially young families are complaining very often that older playgrounds don't have sun shading, and I guess the sandboxes, especially during the longer and hotter summers, this is an important thing in my opinion. I don't know if it fits somewhere in this Paygo financing. And the second is availability or accessibility of toilets. One of the things that the Lebanon design has taught me is that having accessible toilets independently of whether the center is open or not is a great idea, and it's great. Now we have, through all the pickleball users, we have in different places, in different community centers, we have an intensive use when the center is actually closed. And so the question is, I know this is not an easy thing to solve, and maybe it's not even a Paygo item. I'm just putting that on the table.
I can respond briefly, and it's something that welcome a follow up with. The first, I think the first area, the first idea was the shade structure. It is absolutely something we hear all the time. Is a request for more shade. Being very, very sort of open on what our challenges are around the shade is that a lot of times our playgrounds are located near trees and things like this. And so it becomes a challenge to renovate them because we don't want to damage the trees. And so they are moved away from that type of thing, which creates an issue with shade. It's merely comes down to a thing of cost. The shade, to add shade structures is an additional cost. If it is something that is there regionally, it's part of the budget. If not, we need to find a way to work it in. And so it becomes a balance, but it is something that we always hear about and we're always striving to identify. So I think some of the technologies are allowing some different type of shade structures to be used. So that might be something that we'll see more of as we move down in the future. I mean, what I mean by that is a little bit more affordable than some of the large structures that you used to have to see to provide it. The restrooms, just some things to think about. Restrooms is always another question like shade. People love to have access to it. I think you see in some buildings like the Heights and Longbridge and a little bit at Longbridge Park, there are external restrooms that were provided that can be open when the buildings are closed. And so that is one way to do it. There's not always that luxury of having a large building like that. And so how do you provide those type of restrooms? I know it's a balance for us. They are where they don't exist. They are fairly costly to put in. It also has some impact on our operating budget because we used to have restrooms that were open, all year long. Now we close many for the winter season because it's an operating cost. And so it goes beyond sort of, I don't call it my capital program, but my side of the house with the capital program on how that impacts operating. So I think what I would say is those two items are ones we do hear all the time, and we are always trying to work to try to find good solutions. And we're always welcome for suggestions on how to continue to improve in that area.
Thank you.
Yeah, very thoughtful answer. Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, I wanted to just follow up a little bit on the sunshade question. Thank you. So I gather shade is not actually part of our sort of our standards, because you talked earlier about in the answering Mr. Dorsey that we've got these standards and things that we try to look for, but I'm gathering it's sort of an add-on or something.
So it really it depends. Existing playgrounds, we have an existing playground. The shade is usually provided one of two ways. It's either through some type of shade structure that is built over it. For example, you see that at the Longbridge Fields playground, at the Jenny Dean playground, because we were able to start from scratch. That is a shade structure that was there. Many cases it's trees. And what happens is when we are renovating new playgrounds, we plant new trees. Those trees are intended to give shade 15, 20 years when they're fully grown. And so we have a shade issue in the early phases of that. We do try to, when we can, place shade structure or have a area where somebody may sit in shade. Whether we could shade a whole play area begins really just to come into a question of cost, because the larger they are, the larger the foundations, the larger the structure that you have to hold up the shade. And so it is a balancing act on our available budgets or budgets that we are requesting in between shade that will grow and arrive through the growth and the age of the trees, or artificial shade that we're bringing in. And so it is something that we strive for, but I can't say it's a standard to say we must provide shade at every location, or that we have a certain amount of area we have to shade. It really is a case by case, location by location evaluation during our design process. We're looking at the constraints, looking at what the challenges we have, and how we could address some of those.
Thank you for that further detail. I should have realized, of course, we plant trees, and after they grow, that really helps solve the problem. I think with the whole climate change thing and increasing heat and sun cancer concerns and stuff, it's an evolving field, I suspect, but thank you for that response.
Thanks so much. Mr. Doherty, do you have another question or left it over?
Round two,
Yeah, please.
then we have time. Thank you. So, Mr. Beach, earlier on, I appreciated when talking about equity, you look at your distribution of investments across our community. Do we do any secondary analyses by looking at the users of those facilities, both in number or what might be their background, to determine whether or not we're meeting that level of equitable distribution?
We do. And the way we do that is we're cognizant. Let me start this way. So this is the maintenance capital program. So we are sort of functioning within the existing parks and playgrounds and facilities that we have. So we're not necessarily addressing areas where there may be a lack of those services. That comes through the 10-year CIP when we're doing that kind of thing. When we look at how our status as far as safety and repair is necessary on each of the existing assets, we do look at what is some of the characteristics of that neighborhood, economics, some of the different racial makeup that you might have, and things like this, to see how we're equitably distributing our repairs and our dollars. At occasion, sometimes something is at such a state of repair, we just have to do it. But when we can, we do that. We think this year, for example, the pairing or the marriage of Woodmont and Bailey's Branch playgrounds are very similar. They're in very different areas of the county. And so that is, I think, a direct result of seeing some of that filter that we look at when we put our capital program together.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right, Mr. Beach, I think on that note, we will let you go, but appreciate very much some of that insight into not only some of the projects on the docket for the year ahead, but also how you make those decisions. So thanks for the insight shared with us this afternoon. If we have further questions, we can follow up in writing. We'll move next into public safety. I know we have representatives from police, fire, sheriffs, the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Communications and Emergency Management. I think all represented or sort of spoken to by Mary Paxton, our Public Safety Technology Manager. Is that right?
That's correct.
Ms. Paxton, welcome. I'll turn it over to you to give a presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you said, I'm Mary Paxton. I'm going to speak to the public safety funded projects. Next slide. Okay, first project is the mobile data computers. They are being replaced as part of a end-of-life schedule. Mobile data computers are mounted in the public safety vehicles. They're ruggedized, impervious to heat and cold, physically secured with mounts and connected to docking stations for access to wireless broadband. We're purchasing 460 NDTs for all 3 agencies, fire, police, and sheriff, along with 320 docks, 110 cradle points, and any related software. Next project is a computer forensics equipment upgrade. This is an upgrade of the police department's computer forensics lab. This is a forklift upgrade of equipment in the lab that's used to extract, analyze evidentiary data from devices, basically anything that could store data, phones, tablets, PCs. So we are installing or have installed upgraded servers, which are high-speed, high-volume servers, upgraded switches to address the volume of data being transported, workstations and data extraction devices, which have reduced the amount of time it takes to extract data, and have created an Azure workspace for detectives to be able to analyze the data in a cloud space. The computer-aided dispatch system, this is an upgrade to the existing 911 system. This is unique in that we are pursuing this in partnership with Alexandria. Alexandria late last year approved pursuing that partnership with us. This is a follow-on to the project from a few years ago when we jointly pursued a call processing system. So we are now in the process of currently creating functional requirements in preparation for a joint statement of work. Okay, we took a different approach on the asset refresh. These are refreshment cycles for principal systems, of which we have substantial investment in the public safety agencies. For fire, of course, we have fire apparatus, fire radios, and the WestNet fire alarming system, which works in conjunction with CAD to trip the alarms and provide event data to the stations on video displays. Next slide. Next slide is the police department. We spoke about the mobile data terminals and computer forensics. We also have the criminal justice record system, which is a joint system with the sheriff's department, which collects investigative data, criminal records, inmate and booking records used to manage the detention center. Next slide. This is public safety communications emergency management. The principal substantial investment there is both portable and mobile radios, which are in the vehicles as well as the handhelds, and also the base stations, which is the hub connection point for radio transmission. And we spoke to CAD. For the sheriff's office, we have the justice system security system, which is the system used to manage the locking mechanisms in the jail and the cameras to oversee operations. The magnometers for the entrance of the courthouse, live scan to manage fingerprinting and mugshots, and body scanners to do scans in booking to search for contraband. Next slide. This is a list of our public safety projects with associated funding. eSummons is the self-funded project, self-funded system that we use to produce a digital summons. There's a $5 fee that is collected to go towards the maintenance of the system itself. The next 3 systems from Sheriff's Office are associated with the maintenance of the detention center itself, and I'm going to turn that over to Sheriff Arthur.
Hello. Just briefly, the wireless security upgrade is a system that we've been working on that would provide both for residents as well as staff to identify medical blood pressure, heart rate, and so that if something happened and her blood pressure went up high or low, that it would alert through a computer and notify staff that we needed to check on somebody. And this again would be both for staff as well as for residents. The Justice Center security system is for working with DES. To upgrade doors, locks, security systems, software, hardware, in both the detention facility and in the courthouse, camera upgrades and installing some additional cameras in areas and again, courthouse control upgrade that has been in the works or has been, on the outlook for a while. And then lastly, one of my favorite projects is getting our showers epoxied throughout the detention facility. The facility's now been operational for approximately 28 years, and there's just no way to keep the showers clean. They're clean, but they don't look clean. And so this process will get rid of any grout and corners and is easily wiped down with water and will really refresh all of the showers throughout the detention facility. So I look forward to having these projects completed.
Great. Thank you, Sheriff Arthur.
And now the fire projects, I'm going to turn it over to Casey Bailey to talk to those.
So we are doing a Plymouth vent system refresh. This project replaces the systems that remove exhaust from the fire stations from the apparatus. The systems are magnetic and attach automatically to each of the vehicle's exhaust systems to ventilate toxic fumes before the vehicle leaves for a call and once they return. In this first phase, 5 stations where the systems are reaching the end of their life will need to be replaced. Other stations have newer systems that will be replaced at a later date in phase 2. The new systems will replace the outdated hoses, tracks, and compressor systems and upgrade technology, reducing repairs and downtime. In addition, we are also going to finish up the command vehicle technology refresh. This project will complete the refresh for this cycle. It has repairs to the coach itself, which will be completed to ensure operational readiness and safety. The awnings, doors, and damaged flooring will be replaced. Technology upgrades will also be completed and include upgrading cameras to high-definition satellites, cellular, and communication systems. The command unit will be utilized by both the fire department and the police department at this time. And I'm going to send it back to Mary Paxton to talk about the portable radio and radio system upgrades.
Okay, and as Casey said, first is a replacement of the handheld portable radios for the fire department. We do radios in 2 groups. The fire department is this year. And then the public safety radio system upgrades is actually upgrade to the hubs, which we talked about earlier, the base stations, which are the transmission points for the system itself. This is a summary of our overall budget request, which just shows that it's consistent and predictable spending level that is consistent with overall agency business strategies. And that concludes our presentation.
Thank you.
Open for questions.
All right, we appreciate that very much. And I'll open the floor to colleagues for questions. Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Paxton. I was pleased to hear about, earlier in your report, I think it was on the radios that we're, coordinating with Alexandria and going together on purchases. I know that's an effort we've had ongoing for a while. How are we doing? Not just on radios. I mean, I would assume things like the exhaust removal systems is something that everybody in the region or everybody in the area does. And I'm assuming that the more we could cooperate or go in together on contracts and things, the better we might do on cost. So how are we doing on that? Or am I making mistaken assumptions about it?
Actually, the partnership is related to the CAD system and the call processing system that supports it. And where we have had approval from Alexandria City Board to pursue it, we are in the beginning stages of that project.
So is there still some maybe low-hanging fruit out there that if we could work a little more with our colleagues in Alexandria or maybe Falls Church or elsewhere that we might be able to cooperate and save us all some money? Or again, am I kind of mistaken on how that works?
There are possibilities to do that. This is laying the groundwork for that. There are certain memorandums of understanding that have to be established, and we've done that with the call processing system, and we're continuing to build on that with the new CAD system.
That's great. I'll just be interested in pursuing that because I think some of this is actually where, on our level, if we talk to our colleagues, that we might get a little more interest if there's interest, at the elected level, talking to the staff that might help you in your efforts. So any information on that or ways I could be helpful, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to thank our team, certainly Ms. Paxton, for covering a broad swath of issues, and thank you to our sheriff for joining us. I was particularly glad to hear about the continued investments to potentially improve our health monitoring, which I know has become a real priority, or remains a priority for your team. All right, unless there's anything else, we will move on next to our Department of Technology Services, followed by our Department of Human Services. Mr. Belcher, I think you'll be with us to present on behalf of your team again. Is that right?
Yes, I am. I'm presenting with Gilbert Pisano. So thank you so much, Chair Crystal, for inviting us today. And I'm here to talk about the Department of Technology's capital and short-term financing budget. Next slide. Our mission and themes continue to be the same. We focus on resiliency in security, as well as innovation and equity, and making sure that we're doing our utmost to provide for those services in the community. Project accomplishments, again, it's replacing and refreshing the equipment we have in our network and our servers, making sure that we have the highest possible Wi-Fi capabilities and wired communications in the buildings. We completed an upgrade of our prison system to the latest version of the product, and now we're preparing to move to the next stage, which is to go to the cloud on that. And we completed the county website replacement, which was a significant effort, and still a body of work that we're working on to get that correct. It's really based on the content that's put into that. It's not so much a technology issue as making sure that the content's in a form and manner that's easily accessible by the community. So we're still working on that as well. And again, our overall goal is to sustain and modernize, but to secure, to make sure that we're focusing on security and everything we're doing, especially in these days we're facing these threats we are today. Onward. Projects underway. A number of things we've done, of course. We really were foresighted in terms of being able to accrue enough devices, end-user computing devices, so we could migrate from a premise PC to a laptop and more other mobile devices, and we continue to work on that. We continue to work on the network edge and building refreshment. You know, the investment we made in Connect Arlington has paid amazing dividends. We've just completed the upgrade of every school in the county to 10 gigabits. And frankly, the cost is minimal because we had the fiber in the ground. So that was significant effort there. We're looking at a telephone system. In this environment we have today, where we have very few people on site, more of a hybrid version, do we need as many phones on the desktops? And the answer is no. We're moving more to a wireless mentality. And so how do we extricate ourselves from that? At the same time, we're looking at the contact centers, the call centers we have up in place. We have about a dozen that are in place across the county. The one thing that's important when we look at the call centers is making sure that we're training the staff who are the call takers efficiently, and that we're doing the analytics necessary, the conversational analytics necessary to make sure we get we're doing a good job in terms of answering those calls. So looking at they call it omni-channel contact centers, where someone could communicate via a voice call in English and also a voice call in another language to be able to understand what they called in before and be able to give them that concierge service in terms of how they may operate and how we may respond to them is very, very critical. That maybe they want to text us, maybe they just want to have a chat. So we're looking at that. And we're going to get the results of that very shortly. And then the recommendations in terms of how we move forward in that area. We're looking at our core document management system, which we call our enterprise records management system. And that's how we do all our processing of documents and sharing of information. And that's in need of refreshment. Modernization. And so we want to make sure that the tools we have in place are accessible from any place, anytime. And so we're working on that as well. Again, we continue to focus on worker mobility. The enterprise payment system effort that the treasurer is leading is taking us to a new era. She's going to be able to accept, the treasurer will be able to accept Venmo or to take Apple Pay, PayPal transactions, and that's start one. Start two is longer term, looking at what's going to happen in the whole area of the new currencies that are coming down and being able to accept those. So we're happy about that. And then we're also working on the migration of our prison system from to the cloud and to really look at the possibility of having this as a software as a service. And that's something that's underway as well. with that, the next slide is going to be handled by, and from here on, by Gilbert Bazzano, our budget manager. Gilbert, take it away.
Thanks, Jack. Thank you. So just to cover our hardware components of our asset inventory, under our 6-year life cycle, we have assets such as core network equipment, our network edge hub sites, as well as our in-building network edge. And those all are about a 6-year life cycle in which we will replace those every 6 years. We also have the Wi-Fi that's located throughout our buildings, and that's 3 to 5 years that life cycle for those components. And then we also have our UPS, which is our power systems, and those are a 5-year life cycle with our data center and infrastructure as well, and that's kind of a rolling life cycle. We also have assets and servers and hosts that are 7-year life cycle, and those require those kind of a rolling refresh until the end of their life. And then the storage we have also on a 7-year life cycle. And that kind of brings us over to our devices that we distribute to staff, which is our desktops and our laptops. Currently, right at this time, we have a 4-year life cycle for our desktops, but we're moving more and more towards laptops, and those laptops are on a 3-year life cycle. So those are continuous replacements that we're doing every 3 to 4 years of the inventory that we have deployed to our staff. Also want to point out that in our assets, we also have our telephone system, which is 10 years old. And then we also have our wireless communication devices that we distribute cellular phones to staff for communication purposes. Also within our asset inventory, we have enterprise and department software. I just wanted to point out a few items. ACE is due for a refreshment FY24-25, and you'll see that in our CIP request. Real estate assessment system, that's due for replacement and scheduled for the 23 and 24 fiscal years. The ERMS, which is our enterprise resource management system, that's due for currently under study, but the modernization project is due to begin in FY24. And then we also have the new update or the new version of PRISM for our financial HR systems, and that will begin in FY23. If we can go on. To briefly summarize our FY 2023 Paygo request, we have $1.1 million that is in the Paygo category. We have $9.1 million on short-term financing, and then other sources of funding that comes out to $7.8 million. So that brings our total request for the FY 2023 to $18 million. So as our technology demands continue to grow, some of the factors that drive that is just the fact that Arlington County government is more accessible electronically to the public, and also the shift to remote and the mobile workforce. So the focus for this near-term capital investment request, and this is for multi-year projects as well, with phased implementation, and that focus continues to be on addressing those technical burdens and updating and replacing of legacy core systems. So as you'll see, that includes enterprise resource planning tools, which is also known as PRISM. That's the HR and financial systems. There's land records, and there's an electronic records management system. We also have a scheduled refresh of our core servers, network, and end-user devices. And then we also have the implementation of the integrated payment portal for collection of taxes, fees, and fines. Also just wanted to note that a number of these proposals and initiatives will be competitively bid, and once we have finalized those bids, we can then finalize the expenditures and adjust our planned expenditures accordingly. Of course, that's after the contracts are awarded. And so as part of the FY 2023 budget, definitely some key considerations that we are always looking at is maintaining and the applications and the system upgrades and replacements that maintain and support our daily operations, but also looking towards that newer technology, which is cloud migration and technology modernization. We're always looking to continue the sustainment of our remote kind of workforce, and that is supporting that anywhere, anytime work environment. And then, of course, security and resiliency are always the top considerations in everything we look at. And now I'll hand it over to DHS so they can speak about 2 requests that they have that are technology related.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Welcome, DHS.
Hi, folks. It's Anita Friedman, and I'm here accompanied by Glenda Pittman, who's the director of the Finance and Information System Division. Our request is for 2 different systems that are vital to our operations. They're continuations of systems that were initially funded in FY 2022. One is an integrated, comprehensive licensing management system for our daycare centers and in-home childcare, so that we can have real-time information for the public, clients, parents, to document inspections, program enrollment, wait lists, etc. We currently have a paper-based system. The second is to replace our child welfare purchase of service software, which we use to authorize and make payments for foster care services to families and also for adoption. We have a current homegrown system that's been in place since 1995, and it's really on its last legs. So those are our requests. The FY 2023 proposed is for $600,000. Glenda, anything to add?
I don't think so.
Thank you both. I think a system that is older than the youth that it is serving is probably one that is indeed due for replacement. So thank you, Ms. Freeman, and thank you too to the team from DTS for that extensive presentation. I'd love to begin with a question myself, and then I'll turn to colleagues. Mr. Belcher, I think a question for you. You mentioned something that I was excited to hear from our treasurer when we last convened at this table, which was efforts towards an enterprise-wide payment system. She shared with us a little bit about what Arlingtonians might expect from her office of having that system in place, but could you translate that into user ease for us as a result of this investment, and along what timetable? What can people expect in terms of the ability to go to one place to pay tickets, bills, permit fees, etc.? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I'm sorry. I have Elisa Stiggy on the line. Elise, do you want to talk to her? She's working very closely with the treasurer on this, and she can give you the time schedule and when we might see something tangible. That's what we're hoping for, right?
Fantastic. Thank you.
So we did the RFP, and I guess we're at the end of the process. So we don't have a signed contract yet, but we feel we're pretty close, hopefully. So in terms of time frame, it's hard to talk about it. I know that Carla had mentioned she hoped to have some implementation this year, so that's certainly the objective. But we need to first have the contract in place, so that's the point. And what we're looking at is to have a standard payment solution, so that every time that you make payment with the county, you have a standard way of doing it. There's a lot of advantage for that, and there's a portal functionality as well. In terms of the rollout per se, it's going to be over time, because obviously we need to integrate with a lot of different solutions. In some cases, we don't have a solution, so that's kind of easy. It's going to be first priority will be to give a solution to function that currently don't have a solution. So.
Okay. So ultimately the goal would be, for example, I could use the same account that I use to pay my property taxes to pay for parks and recreation enrollment for my kid, for example.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, to have one login, and then you can see what is open balance for the various things that might be, that you might have to pay to the county. Yes.
Great.
Yeah, this is one thing we want to see to really take place. It's so easy to, if you're like my family, we keep forgetting our passwords and
Yes.
we get to it.
Yes.
And we want a single sign-on so that when you come to the county, if you want to get a trash pickup, as I just asked for a few minutes ago from DES, I don't have to worry about my ID and password. I know exactly what it is, and it's the same password or ID to get me into other systems such as to pay my taxes and whatever. And so that's the overall goal we have. And hopefully we can get there quickly, because I think it's a no-brainer. You should have that now.
That's right. And I think there's increasingly people as customers have come to expect that. So I'm so glad to hear that that work's underway and that we're in the final stages of procurement. So look forward to hearing more soon. Colleagues, any other questions? Hey, seeing that. Oh, please.
No question. I just think perhaps DHS ought to win some kind of award for having a system that's been in place for 1995. I think a new system should be the award, but it's just I'm still kind of thinking about that. So thank you. Yeah, and I'm glad to see the upgrade on all of these systems that we're doing. Maybe we'll get to be close to how Amazon does.
That's great. And I'll echo that thanks too, particularly on the idea of the online childcare system. I note that DHS maintains a website that I know has been a huge value to parents, because I've heard from them, especially during the pandemic, about where there are current vacancies and which childcare providers take subsidies, et cetera. The fact that you have been doing that and populating that user-facing site with a paper-based system is amazing. I can't even imagine the amount of work that's required from staff, and I'm so glad that this investment will allow it to be maybe more straightforward and free up some of that brain power for while keeping the resource that is really appreciated in the community. Mr. DeFranti.
I don't want to take away from that point the thought of, I think we've all done translating and putting, that's exhausting, so huge resource there. But I just wanted to add a thanks for the work on the system-wide payment system. Mm-hmm. You mentioned it, and I won't go lengthy on it, but I sort of wanted to say seems super important and really appreciate the work.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so unless there is anything else, we will thank again our DTS team and Ms. Freeman and Ms. Pittman from DHS. And move now into Transportation Capital Fund. And let me be clear with staff too, we've got Transportation Capital Fund, and then we'll do debt service, and then Metro, or TCF and Metro together. Okay, great. So Transportation Capital Fund, I'm sorry, I don't have the name of who will be presenting for that. Is that somebody from DMF or somebody from our... Ms. Crawford, welcome, our Assistant Director of Transportation. So nice to see you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for allowing us to share with you our capital program for FY 2023 today. I am joined in presentation by our Transportation Capital Funds Manager, Vijaytha Huffman, and Ms. Huffman and I will be available for questions afterwards, as will our Director of Transportation, Dennis Leach. So moving on with the presentation to the next slide, we will begin with a review of our Paygo funding requests. These are needed to maintain a state of good repair for some of the assets that you see pictured on our screen. And these needs are not eligible for TCF or TIF, which we'll get into later, due to the eligibility restrictions of those sources. So as you see from these pictures, we have many assets in our right-of-way that support our local and regional multimodal mobility. Shifting to the next slide, we have our asset inventory. It's been interesting seeing some of the other departments' asset inventories, and we're excited to share all of the elements of the right-of-way that we operate and maintain. Of course, we don't maintain the metro rail stations, but we try to provide multimodal connectivity to those metro rail stations through ART bus service, through our the many bridges in our right-of-way, through the capital bike share system that we operate along with our regional partners, and then myriad other assets that are in the right-of-way, some of which many of you use on a regular basis or may never have used or take for granted, such as our uninterruptible power supply units that keep our traffic signals operational even with power outages. One thing to note on this screen, the numbers highlighted in green show the additional assets that we've added to the right-of-way since we last spoke with you last year. Shifting to the next slide, we'd like to focus a little bit on paving. So overall, the pavement condition index is near excellent across the county, and the stable level of funding for Paygo allows us to ensure that we maintain those recent gains through our slurry seal program, which gets that little extra mile out of our pavement before we have to do a full-scale repaving of the roadway. This allows us to maintain those gains both in satisfaction and in the pavement condition. The graph on this slide is a little bit complicated, but I think it shows a nice story over time. The light blue bars show the number of lane miles that are paved each calendar year. The red diamonds indicate the level of citizen satisfaction with the road conditions. This comes from the Community Satisfaction Survey. And finally, the orange line shows the pavement condition index over time. And so as that satisfaction rate was declining, the county poured more resources towards paving, increasing the number of lane miles that we've been able to pave over the past 5 or 6 years. And this has had a notable impact on PCI, which, as I mentioned, is fairly consistent throughout the county, of course, with pockets that do certainly need to be repaved and some that just have been repaved and maintained. The next slide gets to the nuts and bolts of our Paygo funding request. This will allow the Transportation Department, along with our partners in Water, Sewer, Streets, and our engineering program for bridge maintenance, to maintain those assets and make those tactical improvements to ensure that we're maintaining state of good repair. We will also allow for testing of various pilot or temporary treatments with these funds to ensure that we're staying nimble and that when we implement capital improvements and we want to test new items, we first tested them with a tactical or operational treatment. Shifting to slide 6, we will begin discussion of the Transportation Capital Fund. TCF is used for enhancements to our transportation network that add multimodal capacity and access for pedestrians, for bicyclists, for transit users, for all modes. The key point with TCF for both sources is adding enhancements and making incremental improvements to our right-of-way. It's comprised of the 2 funds shown on the screen. Both have been enacted by the General Assembly, and the eligible uses for both our commercial and industrial tax as well as our access to the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority funding is codified in the state code. Moving to slide 7, we wanted to share a snapshot of projects that will be underway in calendar year 2022. Those shown in orange are currently under construction, and those shown with the black stars are projects that will begin in calendar year 2022. The next several slides show examples of recently completed and active improvements in our right-of-way that use the Transportation Capital Fund. I will say that many of our TCF-funded projects also leverage a variety of sources of external funds, from regional grants to state grants and also some federal grants as well. There's 2 projects I'd like to highlight on this slide. On the right side of the slide, show a good example of how we've transformed our right-of-way that may have been in the past over-programmed to vehicles, where we had very wide travel lanes or expansive areas of asphalt. We've implemented capital improvements that really redistribute this right-of-way to other uses, biophilic uses in the case of Walter Reed at 5th Street South, and then greater space for pedestrians and bicyclists on Columbia Pike Bridge over 4 Mile Run. This is really consistent with the tenets of Vision Zero in terms of making sure that we program our right-of-way to really accommodate those more vulnerable modes. On slide 9, I wanted to highlight one project that references something that came up in our CIP discussion last summer, where we talked about alternate methods of project delivery. For the Neighborhood Complete Streets project along 7th Road South, we were able to work with our partners in DES and the Water, Sewer, Streets Bureau to implement this project and quickly deliver bus stop improvements as well as pedestrian improvements without having to take an extensive procurement process and hire a contractor and work, potentially at greater expense with outside resources. So we are looking at ways, not only with our internal partners who obviously have their own massive portfolios, but with our external partners such as VDOT or private developers to deliver some of the improvements in the right-of-way. Shifting to slide 10, I'll turn it over to Ms. Huffman.
Thanks, Sarah. So on this slide, we show a summary of the proposed budget for Transportation Capital Fund. And on the expenditure side, the proposed fiscal year 2023 budget anticipates expenditures of about $88.6 million. That reflects an increase of about $14 million over the fiscal year 2022 adopted budget, or a 19% increase. On the revenue side, we are proposing a revenue budget of $34.5 million, which is just a slight increase over the fiscal year 2022 budget, only about $487,000, or a 1.4% increase. Now, it is worth noting that the expenditures look much larger than the forecasted revenues, because the expenditures include sources of funds additional to what you see for our adopted, for the proposed revenue budget. They include external funding sources, because many of our projects do rely on grants. And it also includes funds, existing funds that we have carried forward from prior years. On the staffing side, we are anticipating staffing levels to remain flat. Now, the adopted budget actually had 34 FTEs, but as part of the FY22 adopted CIP, we received approval for 7 additional FTEs. So what you see here is the revised fiscal year 2022 budget of 41 FTEs, and therefore that number is remaining flat as we go into fiscal year 2023. It is also worth noting that TCF is used, in addition to funding our projects, it is also used to pay for operations and program administration. And that percent is expected to increase in fiscal year 2023 to 24%. In fiscal year 2022, we're forecasting that to be about 21%. Now, the increase is driven by a few different factors, including the art service on Columbia Pike, which we are increasing. And then we also have to pay for 1 quarter of Metro bus service on Columbia Pike. In future years, we anticipate that will be covered by grants. And additionally, we will have the full year impact of the higher FTEs. And aside from that, we also have some additional operations and maintenance costs associated with a couple of our projects. And with that, I will turn it back to Sarah.
Okay, thank you. So we'll shift our discussion now to the Tax Increment Finance District in Crystal City, Pentagon City, and Potomac Yard, and highlight some of the projects in those areas that are funded in part by TIF. As we noted at the beginning of the presentation, back when Ms. Talley was presenting, TIF is a very small funding source, and so we usually program TIF to leverage other sources of funding, federal, state, regional grants, as well as we combine it with TCF to fully fund a project. Several of the projects on the screen are moving into construction or are in construction. Our 18th Street Complete Streets project, which will improve bicycle and pedestrian facilities, as well as we're anticipating breaking ground next month on the Transitway extension to Pentagon City. Back to you, Vijayatha.
And on this slide, we show the proposed fiscal year 2023 budget for TIF. On the expenditure side, we are forecasting $10.8 million, which is an increase of $1.9 million over the FY 2022 adopted budget, or roughly a 21% increase. And this is driven by additional projects that we will be implementing in our Crystal City portfolio, as well as our Army-Navy Drive Complete Streets project. Both of those are driving the increased expenditure year over year. On the revenue side, we are forecasting fiscal year 2023 budget of $4.6 million, which is an increase of roughly $300,000, or about 7% compared to our FY 2022 adopted budget. On the staffing side, staff is actually staying relatively flat. The only reason you see the decrease going from 7 FTEs to 6.5 FTEs, it's really just a technical correction that we had to make.
Okay, great. So we often focus on capital projects when we discuss the capital budget, but we can also use TCF for studies so long as they progress the project to development and then implementation. As a department and a division, we are focused on ensuring that we're providing a transportation network that ensures accessibility, connectivity, and safety for all users of our network. This focus necessitates that we evaluate areas and corridors with a density of users that rely solely on walking, biking, or transit as their primary means of transportation. And so we will have 4 studies active in fiscal year 2023, all of which address bicycle and pedestrian safety, and 3 of which are located in equity emphasis areas as defined by the Transportation Planning Board of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. Several of these projects are in close proximity. The Arlington Boulevard Trail Study, which will kick off with public engagement later this spring, and then the South George Mason Drive Multimodal Study, which will actually have an engagement effort in early April. So we're looking forward to working with various members of our community through these studies to figure out how we can better program the right-of-way to ensure that we are meeting the needs of all users so that they can get safely where they're going with whatever mode that they are afforded to use. Shifting to slide 14, our final slide, this summarizes some considerations of the 3 main local funding sources for transportation. As we discussed, Paygo, and then the 2 components of TCF and TIF. And as we've noted several times, many of our projects do have existing regional, local, and state grants. I think the main thing that we'd like to focus on are some of these pressures, which we'll also discuss as part of the CIP process, which relate to both design and cost elements for projects. Components of the ARD operations and maintenance facility relate to decisions that are still being made on energy infrastructure. And for reference to those watching, BEB stands for battery electric buses. There are design considerations and costs that are yet to be determined for the Crystal City East entrance, although we are working towards resolution. And finally, we're working closely with VDOT and the City of Alexandria to secure federal funds for Arlington Ridge Bridge. Of course, there is competition among many other jurisdictions, but we feel really grateful that we have the support of VDOT and hopefully obtaining some bridge formula program funding, which is part of the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act that was recently passed to provide a wave of federal funding for localities across the country. And to that end, we do anticipate spending more time during the CIP process outlining a multi-year strategy for how we plan to take advantage of the many and very different new federal transportation funding opportunities from that act. And so with that, we will be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you, Ms. Crawford, and Ms. Huffman as well for your assist in that presentation. I will open the floor to colleagues for questions. Mr. DeFranti.
My question is a planning-related question. You closed by mentioning that there's federal funding that will provide opportunities. I guess with respect to this specific fund, and are there additional pieces of work that you would move to, and how are they related to the CIP if federal funding became available that allowed us to move through some of the projects you've outlined more quickly?
If I may ask a clarifying question, are you speaking of federal funding for planning or federal funding then for implementation of what would come out of those planning efforts?
I was referring to implementation, but
okay.
But certainly if planning, I don't know the federal bill as well as perhaps I should to know whether there's also planning resources. But first I was focused on implementation.
There are, just to answer that last question, there are a few for planning, but just given the ability to use some of our capital funds flexibly towards planning, it's a lot easier for us to be nimble in using TCF for these smaller levels of funding for planning studies. To your point, though, regarding using those federal funds or using planning funds to then position us for those federal funding opportunities, I think now I'm bleeding into the beyond 2023 budget conversation and thinking more about that strategy I was mentioning on those federal funds. Some of these studies that we are undertaking could put us well positioned for federal funding opportunities. Many of the federal funding sources have not yet issued the notice of funding opportunities, so we're not yet sure the intricacies of the application requirements and the eligibility criteria for some of these sources. So we can't yet answer what types of projects would be the best fit to then know what we would plan for at this moment to position projects to be the best fit until some of those notice of funding opportunities are released. But we are looking at that, and we're looking across our portfolio to try to figure out how we can be best poised to either submit applications when those notice of funding opportunities are issued this round, or assuming that we learn things from those and anticipate a future round of funding in a subsequent fiscal year, we'll be able to then put forward some planning dollars into studies that would then position us for implementation.
Got it. Okay. That helps. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you. Ms. Crawford, a couple of questions. So first, I know over the last couple of years, we've tried to mature and more routinize our functions of informing Dominion, Washington Gas, and the telecoms whenever we are advertising our paving schedule to ensure that we are able to coordinate work to the greatest extent possible. I just want to check in and see that that's still in place, and hopefully you have good news as to better coordination from those other parties with our paving schedule.
I don't have an answer at this moment, but I can certainly follow up with the team to confirm that that's the case. I'll pause for a moment to see if any of my colleagues from DES do have that answer.
Sure. Happy to have you follow up later. It's okay. It's okay. So next question. Parking meters, I think it's about 150 we are planning on replacing this year. What is our approach to doing so? Are we looking to advance technologies that we use, or are we looking more to maintain some level of integration with the current system?
I'll ask Mr. Leach to respond to this question.
Thank you.
Sure, happy to answer that. So we have a variety of technologies. We have our multimeters, we have our IPS credit card reading meters, and we also have pay by cell. We have just refreshed the technology in our multimeters, so we've been able to successfully extend the life of those at a relatively modest cost, which reduced the amount of money we needed in Paygo. And so that's really good news. Our multimeters are generally in a state of good repair. We continue to look at technologies to see if, the next generation of meter technology can actually make improvements and is more sustainable than what we have. But we did we saw a tremendous accomplishment in being able to, through some very modest replacement of parts, really extend the life of all of our multimeters.
So what are we buying this year then? I guess specifically, is it something similar to what we have, or
that is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Unless there are any other questions from colleagues, I think we are ready to move on. We will look forward to, in many ways, continuing this conversation in no time at all as we embark on our CIP. And in the meantime, Ms. Crawford, Ms. Huffman, and colleagues, thank you so much for the presentation this afternoon. Okay. Will we be looking to Mr. Freeze for debt service as well as Metro? We are so glad to welcome you, sir. Bring us home.
Thank you. Yep. So again, I'm Jason Freeze from the Department of Management and Finance. So I'll be doing the last two topics, which is our debt service budget and then Metro. So if we go to the next slide, for debt service, in fiscal year 2023, the general fund debt service is expected to increase by approximately $3.6 million. That's about 5% to $77.1 million. This is consistent with the projections that were included in the adopted fiscal 2022-2024 CIP, and it includes payments on previously issued debt, as well as new debt service for a planned bond sale this June of $48 million for county projects. This bond sale includes projects that are at the bottom of this slide below, which are for maintenance capital, paving, neighborhood conservation, bridge maintenance and renovation, planning for Arlington Boathouse, Metro, and others. Now, we are in the process of reviewing all of these projects for their cash flow needs this year, and we may revise or lower that request prior to the issuance. We will be coming back to the board, including for this bond sale, including the final issuance amounts in May. So if we go to the next slide, this slide here shows, and you've all seen this probably many times before, it's the projection of debt service as a percentage of the county's projected general fund expenditures, one of the main financial policies that we adhere to. The policies limit this to 10%, and as you can see, we get as high as 9.7% in fiscal 2025. And this is due partly to, and you look at the small piece in red, what this represents is the recent Barcroft acquisition loan that we closed on in December. With the inclusion of this, the four-year projection puts us at 9.7%. Now, if you see in gray, the out years, they do not, those are grayed out and they're low. That's because it doesn't include any new debt, and that's because of the most recent adopted CIP only being for 3 fiscal years. We did not program anything beyond fiscal 2024, which is also impacts fiscal 25. So with that, the county manager will be coming back. We will come back to you very soon with that updated CIP, and you will see all of those out year numbers at that time. So if you go to the next slide, slide 4. So if you look at key budget considerations, as I just mentioned, the county manager will be proposing his fiscal 2023 through 2032 CIP. It's we're finally getting back to that 10-year time frame that we normally present, and that at that time, the 10-year projection of debt service and all the financial policies will be updated. And as you saw on the previous slide, Barcroft will have an impact on the county's overall debt burden, and it may have an impact on that future debt affordability. The debt service for AHIF, it's currently budgeted in AHIF, and it's partially offset by anticipated annual loan interest due from the developer of 1% annually, which is about $1.5 million, which will leave the net impact of about $700,000 to AHIF next year. And so I'll stop there before we go to Metro and open it up to any questions.
I'll begin with just one, Mr. Freese. Thank you. So you were describing the Barcroft debt service as AHIF supported. I know we had talked to some extent during the loan approval for Barcroft that's subject to a master finance agreement. We would be potentially either servicing that debt through AHIF or through other revenue sources in the county. Does the description here of this as AHIF supported debt mean that that's now the recommendation that we service that on through the AHIF, or is that still subject for discussion and we're sort of categorizing it as AHIF supported debt as like a placeholder while we figure out that master finance agreement?
I think it's subject to further discussion for now as a starting point. The debt service, as we've currently executed the agreement, is coming from AHIF for this year.
Okay.
But that is something that can be, it's not permanent, that is open for discussion.
Okay.
But for the time being, with the line of credit, AHIF is a current portion, and it's covering, like I mentioned, the net impact. So those revenues will also, from the loan, the 1%, will also
Offset
go back into AHIF to offset.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful. Any other questions? Ms. Garvey?
Yeah, thank you. This graph on slide 3 reminded me of many a graph I'd seen when I was on the school board. And I think their limit is 10% too. That's kind of the idea. We both keep it at 10%. Is that?
There is no individual 10%.
So the school, that's actually where I'm headed.
Combined.
So schools is combined in here.
Correct.
That's what I actually needed to know. Thank you.
There is no county only or schools only. There is a combined amount that we limit ourselves to, which is the 10%. It excludes the utility fund, excludes stormwater debt, but it does for general county, which is county and schools. It is included.
Yeah, thank you. I know when I was schools, we broke it out, but that's fine. No, it's good to know. That's what I was checking. Thank you.
Mr. DeFranti.
I think maybe I'll just flag this slide. I'm trying to sync it with page 690 which has estimations as to percentages of the debt service. And maybe when, just to flag for you all to help me understand, it seems like the last 2 or 3 years, our budget, the 10% we should be falling further, not way below, but further below it, because we have not invested big in our CIP. So I think it's a CIP-related question, but this slide gives me certainly mindful of the Barcroft piece, but I'm trying to sync this slide's, we're getting so close to the 10%, with the reality that the last 2 or 3 years we have not done big CIPs. And Mr. Schwartz's light is up, and he is going to
Yes, I will only tell you this, which is the last 2 years we've been on vacation. And as we come into the next 10-year CIP, as Jason has been trying to scare me, he has actually succeeded. With the Career Center and some really major investments coming on, the last few years we said, please don't focus on the 10% because it's not an issue. It will be the issue that we face going forward, and the amount of debt service that's going to increase. That doesn't mean we'll exceed it, because we have a commitment not to do that. But we have a lot of pent-up demand, and the reason why I think Jason was focusing on them being grayed out and saying it doesn't include anything is there's a lot of pent-up demand. I'll just leave it at that.
And that's really helpful. Thank you. That's a this May and perhaps next May sort of a thing. Thanks.
God willing, it's a this May and then a 2024 May, because I think it's going to kill us all if we keep doing CIPs every year. So, all right, excellent. Unless there are any other questions, I think, Mr. Fries, we can let you barrel forward into the Metro conversation as well.
Great. Okay, so we'll move on to Metro. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was with Metro was actually, let me go back on my slides, to talk about some of the things that happened at Metro related to fares and service, just so folks can know. So on the fare side for fiscal 2023, the general manager did make a few changes. Some were kind of temporary changes that happened last year that are made permanent, and some are just new for fiscal 2023. Some examples are some of those temporary that are now permanent are free rail to bus transfers of a $2 discount. A reduced 7-day regional bus pass. It was previously $15, now it's $12, and weekend $2 flat fares on rail. Some of the new fare changes are a $2 late night rail fare for one-way trips after 9:30 until close, as well as discounted monthly passes depending on your travel distance, a 50% discount on 7-day unlimited passes, and a $5 bonus on every $25 loaded to your Smart Trip card. On service side, the Silver Line Phase 2 is expected to begin in fiscal 2023. I think the general manager just this morning mentioned they were hopeful to maybe get it before the end of this fiscal year. It's not likely. It's not going to happen now. So sometime hopefully early in fiscal 2023 that will occur, and Phase 2 will begin service. There are also several improvements to the service times on both rail and bus. So in regards to subsidy, the fiscal 2023 subsidy, it maintains a 3% cap on growth as a total for all jurisdictions at $1.14 billion. And this is made possible by WMATA's use of $681 million of federal relief funding in fiscal 23, which makes up for a continued loss of transit revenues due to the lingering impacts of COVID on ridership. What this means for Arlington is that our total gross subsidy, when adjusted for federal subsidies, is increasing by about $2.8 million, or 3.6% to $79.9 million. This increase is being covered by the county by the use of some existing state aid balances that are on hand at the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. Now, these are available due to WMATA receiving federal relief dollars in fiscal 21 and fiscal 22, which lowered the county's annual subsidy contributions in those fiscal years. The general fund contribution will remain flat year over year at $46.6 million. There will be a small increase of $300,000 paid from the Transportation Capital Fund. And as mentioned earlier, this is to cover partial year costs for expanded service on the 16M bus line on Columbia Pike. So if we go to the next slide. So in terms of key budget considerations, and talking about WMATA future budget pressures, we've all probably heard from the general manager how he speaks to the issues facing the agency. And as mentioned earlier, ridership remains well below historical levels, leading to a significant dip in revenues that support the system. This has been manageable throughout the pandemic, thanks in large part to the federal aid that has been received, totaling over $2.4 billion. Now, this funding source is expected to be fully depleted in fiscal 2024, with only about $186 million available at this point to support operations. That leaves, as of most recent reports, a starting gap in fiscal 24 of over $480 million to the agency. Staff the county will be monitoring this closely, and we'll update the board once WMATA does start that fiscal 2024 budget process. But we do know that for this fiscal year, at least fiscal 23, we are okay. Fiscal 2024 will potentially be difficult depending on what happens going forward. And with that, I'll stop on Metro and open it up to questions.
Okay. I suppose best described as dodging a bullet this year and a more serious conversation coming for fiscal 24. I think I saw Ms. Garvey's light on first and then Mr.
Yeah,
Dorsey.
fine. And along those lines, I was remembering there have been discussions or efforts to try to get the federal government to help with operating funds for Metro. I think they do capital but not operating. Do you know anything about how those are doing? Maybe some of my colleagues know better than I. Any progress on that front? Because it's looking scary. Yeah, this year, as you said, this year's fine. Next year's looking scary.
I don't have an update on that. I know that's been talked about for a long time over the years, given the heavy federal usage of the system, but I don't know what the status of that is right now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Dorsey.
So, Mr. Freeze, do you know if anyone has, looked at how much ridership needs to rebound, how fast, how much, in order to not cause, there's the fiscal side, but then there's the what will WMATA do given the 3% cap to the service delivery side as well to respond. Has anyone looked at how fast ridership needs to rebound in order for the worst not to be on the table?
I thought I had. So when I was looking at ridership, looking at their projections, they were showing for fiscal 2023 restoration of revenues at about 53% of pre-pandemic levels, which is about 167 million. They show that going up to as high as 75% by fiscal 25. So they're showing a slow increase, and even 2 years out, 2 to 3 fiscal years out, still only 3/4 of the original transit ridership. So it would have to be almost not a doubling, but a significant increase in order to close that gap.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Karantonis?
Just quickly, Mr. Freeze, the order of magnitude of the gap in 24, in fiscal 24?
The gap, the amount, it was for the entire agency, not for the county, it's $480 million. Now that's a little bit old. I think that's a month or two old. It may have changed. I thought I may have heard they might have received a load of additional federal funding of $130 million. So this 480 might be 350, roughly that amount now. But it is a significant, it's not a small number.
Yeah. And contingent on ridership returns, which you were just discussing with Mr. Dorsey.
Exactly. Okay, thank you.
Mr. DeFranti?
I just think it's worth, what's not being said here is pretty important. All of us recognize it, but appreciate you bringing it to our attention, and you as chair of NVTC and all the different work. You all will plan for next year, but it will help if we have I could benefit, perhaps I should look back to see how Metro has increased in the most difficult of years, because this is a big issue, and we all know it, but I think it's worth at least saying it out loud.
Indeed. And Mr. Freeze, you may want to comment on that. And I'll just note, of course, as a result of the 2018 capital funding investment from the Commonwealth imposed, and I think the other jurisdictions joined in imposing that 3% cap. Of course, there are exceptions to it, but I think it's just important to specify. The good news of that is that our bill will not, fluctuate wildly. The bad news is that means that massive gap that Mr. Freeze described for us would have to be reached largely through draconian service cuts. So I'm glad that you surfaced that, and I think that's an important one to note. And I know we have a lot of effort underway to participate in both incenting returns to ridership, some of those new fare products that Mr. Freeze described at the top of his presentation. Certainly, it would help if those maintenance programs, like the total shutdown of the yellow line that is coming after Memorial Day, were not timed to exactly when we were trying to get riders back on Metro. But having been in pretty detailed conversation with WMATA's staff, keeping the system safe is important. And so that tunnel improvement will be happening. And I know our staff, and this is an opportunity, Ms. Crawford and team are still on the line, to thank them for the detailed collaboration on things like bus bridges, et cetera, so that people can continue to consider public transit as part of their decision-making as they return to the office. Mr. Dorsey?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment, the timing of the Yellow Line bridge closure is most unfortunate, but just to remind everyone, it was the fire in the tunnel on a Yellow Line train that caused a loss of life, which really precipitated Metro's downfall in ridership in recent times. So, we have to endure the necessity of a state of good repair if ridership is ever going to have a chance, as inconvenient as it might be. But, wow, we have a challenging set of policy decisions and conversations to make over the next few years.
Indeed. Well, we appreciate your dedicated analysis, Mr. Rees, whatever those may be, helping us consistently understand the impacts on the Arlington County budget. I believe that concludes our presentations today. Is that right? A big thank you to the DMF team. This is really a day for you all to shine because I know you work closely with every single one of the departmental presentations. We appreciate you all. When you will, I suppose this is the last time you will see us in this configuration for our budget sessions, but they are by no means done. We will next move to hear from members of our community. That is our two budget hearings, the first on the budget in general, which is to say the expenditures on Tuesday, March 29th, this upcoming Tuesday at 7 p.m., followed by Thursday, March 31st at 7 p.m. on the various proposed tax and fee rates, as well as code amendments. Please visit countyboard.arlingtonva.us if you would like to sign up. We would welcome the chance to hear from you. Following that, we will also have an opportunity to sit at a budget table with our colleagues from the school board and discuss both of our two budgets and how they will fit together within revenue sources in Arlington County. So let me take the opportunity to say a big thank you to not only DMF, but all the departments involved in our briefings to date. And we look forward to reconvening on Tuesday to hear from the community. Thanks so much. We're adjourned.